Hello, Cornerstone Church. Pastor Phil here, coming to you on day 7 of our 21 days of passion. 21 days leading up to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, focusing on the passion of Jesus, his suffering, and our passion for God as we try to grow in the depth of our love for him and the expression of that love in our lives. And at the same time, we are going through this lockdown as a result of the coronavirus. And I want to expand the theme a little bit just to reflect the reality of what we're going through. And I want to address that as well because I think it really is timely, and people need to have a timely word about what's going on in the world around us. So in relation to coronavirus, I want to go back again to the book of Esther and the expression that Mordecai uses when he encourages Esther to go and speak to the king about the plight that the Israelites are facing. They're in a dangerous circumstance where they're facing annihilation, is what the reality of the situation is. They have an enemy that is seeking to annihilate the entire Jewish nation from all over the world, wherever they live. He's going to wipe out all the Jews, and he's got a fairly lethal plot that has been unleashed. And Esther is in a position of influence in the court. I mean, not in the sense that she's married to the king. She didn't have any real influence in terms of directing policy or anything, but all she could do is she had access. That's what it was. She had access, and she could plead for mercy with that access. But at the same time, there's a threat, because if she were to go unannounced in to see the king and he didn't react well, he didn't take to it well, he could literally have her put to death. Unless the policy was, unless you were summoned to come into the king, you couldn't just go into his presence. If you did that and you caught him in a bad mood, he would just put you to death. And Esther explains that to Mordecai and says, he hasn't called for me for a long time. And I can't just walk into his presence because he could put me to death. Mordecai says, you're here for this very reason. He says, this is the reason why God moved you into that position. This could be the very reason that you've been brought into this position for just such a time as this. And that's the point that I want to make for us as the church in this day and age. I've said several times, I'm going to say again, this does not catch God off guard. God is not surprised by this. God is not caught off guard by this. And so from that perspective, we need to think that he has us here for a reason. He has us here for a specific purpose. And we have to take advantage of that purpose. And what that is we have to speak his word into our circumstances. We have to speak his word over our family and our friends. Some of it may be just modeling faith to those around us. Maybe you have kids at home and they're nervous, they're afraid. The reality of the situation now is that this is starting to hit home. We're starting to hear cases of extended family members and friends and others that are testing positive or that have been exposed to it, and we don't know how to respond to that. And it's scary when it gets that close. It's not something that's just around the world anymore. It's not something that's just in China or Italy or wherever we might want to say. It's hitting home. And so we have to have a response to that. Our kids need to see how we respond to that. Our family members need to see how we respond to this. And what we need to do is we need to walk in faith through this circumstance. We need to be able to stand in the confidence that we have based on what God's working in us and his word in our lives. We've got to be able to say to those around us, this life is not the real life. This life is just a prelude to eternity. And if we live out of that confidence that this life is just a prelude to eternity and that there's something coming on the other side of death, there's something coming that's better than what we have here. If we can model that confidence and that faith, that can really be a powerful witness to our family members, to our kids, to our brothers and sisters, our co-workers, our friends, our neighbors. And that's what they need to see. They need to see Christians that are really living out their faith. that are not afraid to face death because they know that there's something better waiting for them. And so as we try to teach people how to live in terms of walking out the love of God in their lives, we also need to teach people how to die. And that means that we are not afraid of death. Whenever God brings it our way, hallelujah. It's a promotion for us. We're moving into something better. And we need to have that confidence. So God has raised us up for such a time as this, that we might speak his word into our situation and our circumstances, and that we might be witnesses for him in the world around us. So I pray that God will strengthen you in that as we go forward, that he will give you very specific instructions on how to live that out, how to carry that out in the context of your family, your kids, your brothers and sisters, and so on, and that it will be fruitful, that we will have a fruitful witness at this time, that we will maybe do things completely differently as a result of what's going on around us, and that God will be glorified in it. So now back to our study, 21 Days of Passion. You know, we've been alternating between the two definitions of passion that we're working with. Passion as the sufferings of Jesus, and passion as a fervent, ardent affection and love for God. This morning, today being the seventh day, we are back onto the sufferings of Jesus side. And I want to touch again on the emotional turmoil that Jesus struggled with. We've touched on this a couple of times now, and I want to do one more. If you look at Matthew chapter 26, starting in verse 36 and following, this is what Matthew writes for us. It says, "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled." So in the setting, what we've got here is Jesus takes all of the disciples out to the Garden of Gethsemane. And when they get there, he moves further on. He leaves the 9, wherever they were, closer to the entrance, or I don't know the geographic layout. But then he takes with him Peter, James, and John. Those are the two sons of Zebedee, James and John. And these are the inner circle. These are Jesus' inner circle. The ones that accompany him on all of his most intimate ministry times. He always brought those 3 with him. So now he brings them off by themselves, and he goes on, and he goes a little further. He says to them, in verse 38, he says to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." So Jesus says to them, my soul is so burdened. You know, we looked at this in John's gospel when John talks about how it says that Jesus was troubled in spirit. And I explained, you know, that the Greek word there and all the depth of what it means. Well, here Matthew gives us another view of this. Jesus himself is saying, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He says, I feel so burdened right now that I could die. It feels like I'm going to die because of what's coming down the pipe here. And he says to them, stay here and keep watch with me. That means he wants them to pray. That term, keep watch, it refers to when watchmen would be set on the wall to look out for enemy attacks. And they had the responsibility to be alert and to be looking to see if an enemy came. If an enemy came, they were the ones that were supposed to sound the alarm so that the rest of the town could wake up and be prepared for the attack. And so there's very interesting terminology that Jesus uses there. Stay here and keep watch with me. He wants them to stay awake and pray. And that's the role that they were supposed to keep. So then it says, he goes off a little further. He fell with his face to the ground and he prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Verse 41, then he returned to the disciples, verse 40. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Verse 42, it goes on. He went away a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Verse 45, then he returned to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. So in this moment of tremendous need in Jesus' life, he has his closest friends around him and shares with them the burden of his heart that he feels like he's going to die. It's so intense. The turmoil in his spirit, in his soul is so intense. He feels like he's going to die. And he says, pray with me. Please pray for me. And he goes off and he prays by himself and he comes back and he finds them sleeping. They couldn't even make it an hour. And he goes off again, he comes back, he finds them sleeping again. Goes off a third time, comes back, finds them sleeping again. In his moment of greatest need, when Jesus was begging for some help, his disciples fell asleep. Think of that feeling of abandonment in that moment, how Jesus must have just cried out, just the pain he felt of being abandoned and alone. You know when you need help and you ask somebody for help, you know how bad it feels when they let you down. And that's what Jesus felt in that moment. And I think it must have broke his heart. This is all part of the suffering that Jesus endures for us. I pray that we might be able to meditate on that more and just know better the price that Jesus paid for our salvation. God bless you and have a beautiful day in Jesus' name.